Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and these are the 5 best card reveals in the One Night in Karazhan adventure. I think these will be the 5 cards that take off the most, that we see regularly in the meta, and that perhaps even define some brand new decks. That said, of course, this is before the adventure hits that I'm recording this video, so these are my guesses. Only time will tell if these cards actually work out in the long run. But let's go ahead and jump in and see my top 5. Starting off with number 5, it is the new Hunter card, Cloaked Huntress. I like this one because of a couple reasons. It's got really solid stats for its cost, which is always a good baseline measure of value. Plus, it has an effect that can do crazy things, and it's also very high tempo, particularly in the early game, which is usually quite relevant in making a deck good. You have to get out there early with a strong board and play a lot of stuff as quickly as possible, and this card supports that mentality quite nicely. Plus, I think it could further enable the lock and load style Hunter deck and make it even better and pull off some absolutely ridiculous turns. And any cards that can do things like that deserve some attention and some recognition and certainly some playtesting. And I think we'll see Cloaked Huntress define some new deck styles and be included in a variety of Hunter archetypes. Moving on to the number 4 spot, it is the new dragon Bookworm. This 6 mana 3/6 has a very powerful battle cry. Anytime you're holding that dragon, you get to destroy an enemy minion with 3 or less attack. So this is basically a bigger, nastier Stampeding Kodo with a slight condition, but as we've seen with a variety of dragon decks, it's really not hard to pull off that dragon condition. You're almost always holding a dragon, so you'll usually be able to activate this effect with some consistency and predictability. And 3 attack is so much better than 2 attack. So many minions have 3 attack that don't have 2 attack, like Bookworm himself, for instance, that I think this card will be even stronger than Stampeding Kodo. Plus, of course, it's a targeted effect, unlike Stampeding Kodo, which is random, so it's a major upgrade to a card that is already played. Stampeding Kodo is already in the meta, and this one has a different tribe than Stampeding Kodo, but certainly one that is still playable in Dragon decks. So I think we'll see Bookworm show up in a lot of Dragon decks, and perhaps even just some more generic control style decks as well that happen to run a few dragons, just because this effect is so darn good. Up next, the number 3 spot is the Arcane Giant. This is the latest giant to be added to the set of giants, and this one's cost reduction is affected by spells cast, and I think that's probably the best one yet, because there are so many decks that don't have trouble casting spells. In fact, cast a lot of cheap spells, even in the early game. There are things like Tempo Mage, there are always rogue decks that go off with spells. Druid decks these days love to cast spells as well. So I think almost any of those decks could find a way to play Arcane Giant, which means at some point in the mid to late game, you're going to have an extremely low cost 8/8 that can hit the board and give those decks a huge swing turn and a free threat, basically. And those decks are already solid. So the fact that this card can be added in at very little risk and with a huge payoff makes me think that we'll see Arcane Giant fit into a lot of different decks that love to utilize spells. Even if he comes out 3-4 mana, he's still a very strong card that can define games. So I think this Giant might just be the best Giant in the set yet. Moving on to the number 2 spot, it is the new Druid card, Menagerie Warden. This one can just do unfair, gross, nasty things, and any card that can make really big plays and do just unbeatable OP things in a single turn is a card that usually ends up defining decks. And this one is mostly because of other beast cards that Druid has access to, namely Stranglethorn Tiger and Druid of the Claw at 5 mana, 2 of the best beasts in the game, both at 5 mana, which is immediately followed by this 6 mana card that allows you to summon a copy of those 5 mana beasts on curve. So for 6 mana, you can basically get a 10/10 in total stats for that Stranglethorn Tiger, and half of it will be stealthed. Or with your Druid of the Claw, you can get a nice taunt or even a nice charging minion as well. And sometimes with Druid, since they have Innervate, you could even do that in the same turn. You could charge your Druid of the Claw innervate out your Menagerie Warden and have a totally ridiculous, a giant 11 mana turn that now has 3 minions on the board, 8 of it charging for damage. So all kinds of crazy stuff can happen with this card. And even if you don't have one of those big 5-drop beasts on the board, you can still pull a lot of value out of this card just with like the 1 mana 2/2 Raven. You're still getting 7/7 on the board, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's comparable to something like the Mage's Faceless Summoner at that point, which is also a good and playable card. So this one has a lot of ways to fill up your board and do unfair things, and I think it will be setting up Beast Druid finally as a viable archetype that has some very powerful turns, and that's a nice thing to see. So Menagerie Warden taking in the number 2 spot, but it's not the best card in the set. I believe the top card from One Night in Karazhan will end up being the new legendary Barnes. This 4 mana 3/4 has a very interesting battle cry. It summons a 1/1 copy of a random minion from your deck, and I think we're going to see a number of decks designed around this Barnes effect, and frankly he'll just fit into a lot of control decks even as they sit right now, who just run really big minions who do cool stuff. For instance, Ragnaros, Tyrian Forge Ring. Imagine summoning 1/1 versions of those. With Tyrian Forge Ring, you get an Argent Squire with a Death Rattle that gives you a 15 damage weapon. Ragnaros, even as he comes out as a 1/1, you instantly get to do 8 damage to your enemy side of the board. So many cards are defined by their effect and not by their stats. Of course, all the Death Rattle cards as well. And Barnes synergizes so well with any of those cards. The decks that run multiples of cards like that, as long as there's 5 to 10, there's a very good chance he's going to hit on something good. And I can even see this in decks that run a lot of spells with just a few key minions. You'll be able to predictably get something out of Barnes, like Malagos, for instance. So you could have a crazy Malagos turn where you're guaranteed to summon Malagos. You have all those spells in hand and 6 mana to play them. That's a dream come true. So the possibilities for cards like Barnes are almost limitless just because of the things he allows you to do. He offers fine control over his effect, but also just a lot of raw potential power in his effect. Plus the stats aren't bad. So cards like this are really scary to see and a lot of fun to see as well because they're very promising. And that to me is why Barnes is going to end up being the very best card from the One Night in Karazhan adventure. Now I'm sure you think I'm crazy, or I got the order all wrong, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. So feel free to leave a comment below. Tell me why I'm wrong and why you're right. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.